This month, Russia faced one of its most devastating blows since the war in Ukraine began, and it was not delivered by tanks, missiles, or artillery, but by a force just as coordinated and destructive: bureaucrats. Equipped with spreadsheets and maritime lawyers wielding sanctioning orders, the United Kingdom and the European Union launched another comprehensive, coordinated economic strike against Russia's so-called shadow fleet, the ghost armada of aging oil tankers that has served as President Vladimir Putin's financial lifeline. This is modern warfare at its finest, crippling one of the world's largest militaries without firing a single shot, relying on economic measures designed to cause both immediate and long-term damage to Russia's ability to sustain its war in Ukraine. The question now is, how deep is the damage to this shadow fleet, and why is stopping it a key part of Europe's strategy to end the war? The offensive began on July 18th when the European Union unveiled its 18th sanctions package, a bombshell that not only added more vessels to its blacklist, but also introduced a dynamic oil price cap. For the first time, Europe set an oil price mechanism that adjusts to market conditions, bringing the cap down from $60 per barrel to $47.60 starting September 3rd. Importantly, this reduction applies only to Russian oil or oil sourced through Russian intermediaries. Major exporters like Norway, Canada, and the United States remain unaffected, making clear the true target is Moscow. The impact multiplied when, just 3 days later, UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced Britain's largest maritime sanctions package ever, targeting 2 companies and 135 oil tankers that had moved millions of dollars worth of Russian crude since early 2024. These ships were not randomly selected. British intelligence used advanced tracking systems capable of detecting sanction evasion even when Russia attempted to go dark. The sanctions struck at the heart of the shadow fleet's enablers. Intershipping Services LLC, a Gabon-based registrar of shadow vessels, was cut off from Western finance, disrupting a network that had facilitated up to $10 billion in Russian goods annually. At the same time, Letasco Middle East, DMCC, a Dubai subsidiary of Russia's third-largest company, Look Oil, lost access to crucial maritime services, hampering its operations in what used to be more than 30 countries, now reduced to only 14 under sanctions pressure. The timing could not have been worse for Moscow, as the sanctions landed during Russia's peak shipping season to Asia, directly affecting 444 ships, including the 135 directly tied to these 2 companies. The restrictions forced longer routes, greater costs, and in some cases the suspension of operations entirely. To fully grasp the devastation, one must understand how Russia built this shadow fleet in the first place. It was born in 2022 as sanctions cut off oil revenues immediately after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Desperate to keep oil flowing, Moscow turned to the complexity of maritime trade, repurposing aging vessels 15 to 25 years old, reflagged under nations like Gabon, renamed and disguised with misleading paperwork. The ships regularly disabled their automatic identification systems, effectively turning off their GPS, vanishing for days before reappearing in international waters to conduct ship-to-ship transfers. These operations turned Russian oil into Gabonese or Maltese oil with fresh paper trails, while low-grade insurers from Russia, Kazakhstan, or Kyrgyzstan issued barely valid paperwork. By mid-2025, maritime intelligence estimated Russia had roughly 1,100 shadow fleet vessels and another 900 grey fleet ships suspected of evasion, amounting to about 17% of global oil trade. The shadow fleet's importance to Russia cannot be overstated. Oil and gas revenues traditionally accounted for 30 to 50% of federal income. When sanctions first hit in 2023, revenues collapsed by more than 40%. By 2024, the shadow fleet had clawed back around $9.4 billion in extra revenue, enough to cover months of war spending. But this lifeline carried hidden costs. Shipping oil to Asia instead of Europe adds $10 to $15 per barrel in expenses. With Russia exporting 5 million barrels per day, each added dollar means $5 million lost daily. Combined with longer transit times, heavy maintenance, and insurance loopholes, inefficiencies compound rapidly. Meanwhile, Russia's 2025 federal budget shows staggering pressure. Military spending alone consumes about $142 billion, nearly a third of total expenditure, an unprecedented level not seen since World War II, leaving education, healthcare, and infrastructure to wither. The new European price cap, expected to reduce oil revenues by around 20% in September, compounds this crisis. Russia could pivot to Asia, but the costs and discounts demanded by China and India leave Moscow with little leverage. European demand for Russian energy is vanishing. Pipelines offer limited alternatives, and Ukrainian strikes on refineries and pipelines further cripple land-based options. If 444 vessels are sidelined, Russia faces a logistical nightmare during peak demand, with older ships forced to take on more while under intensified scrutiny. Worse, the dynamic cap mechanism lowers prices automatically whenever Moscow attempts to bypass rules, trapping Russia in a downward spiral of reduced competitiveness. China is a double-edged sword. Though not sanctioning Russia directly, Chinese banks increasingly refuse Russian payments. By late 2024, 98% of Chinese banks rejected direct yuan transfers, forcing costly workarounds. Add to this the growing reach of artificial intelligence. UK and EU detection systems now monitor shipping lanes using satellites, AIS data, thermal imaging, and predictive analytics. Platforms like Windward Maritime AI can trace vessels even when transponders are off, analyzing thermal signatures and wake patterns to expose shadow operations. Russian countermeasures, GPS spoofing, multiple transponders, electronic identity swaps only create new detection opportunities. In short, technology is turning the tide, making evasion ever more expensive and less reliable. These sanctions are not acting in isolation. The EU, UK, US, Canada, Japan, and Australia coordinate through the REPO task force and a separate shadow fleet task force, ensuring intelligence is rapidly shared and sanctions are enforced across continents. Nordic and Baltic initiatives add regional muscle, protecting pipelines and undersea infrastructure while closing enforcement gaps. The more Europe tightens its grip, the fewer escape routes Russia has left. As autumn 2025 approaches, the compounded effect of these sanctions is set to meaningfully degrade Russia's ability to sustain its war effort. The question now is not if the sanctions will work, but whether they will bite fast enough to end the war before Russia's economic collapse drives Putin to even more desperate, dangerous measures.